Uh, Welcome everyone. Welcome to the first tasting of 2024. Um, yeah, I can't believe 2023 is over. We're on to new year. We are going to Austria this month. Uh, Austria, I mean, I'll get into that in a second, but yeah, Austria is something very near and dear to my heart, especially as a natural wine person. It's kind of a birthplace of a lot of natural winemaking techniques. There's a lot of, I mean, we talked about during the biodynamic month, witchcraft month, Rudolf Steiner, the Austrian philosopher and agronomist, the founder of a biodynamic farming. So this is kind of the way it all kind of begins. There's a lot of thinking behind it, a lot of philosophical debates going on behind it, and a lot of practitioners of natural winemaking and biodynamic farming happening here. So it's a really fun place for a natural wine club facilitator like myself. And this month we're going to feature a whole bunch of wines. I mean, these days Austrian wines are everywhere. It's kind of become the premier wine regions, wine producing nation of the world. But we're going to do something a little different in a true 6 foot wine club fashion. I'm featuring all the wines that are just a little outside the box, just a little bit different, even within Austria, and then highlighting some of the kind of younger generation, young winemakers who are doing something just a little counterculture. So pretty excited. But yeah, that's how we're kicking off 2024 with our Austrian month. Just a few things. This being the first week of the month, just for the rookies, I don't see any new folks on the call right now, but in case they're watching the recording later, my name is Un. That's spelled W-O-O-N-G, as you can see on the screen, but it's pronounced like Un, like a moon without the M, or soon without the S, or spoon without the SP, or with the G at the end, in authentic way of pronouncing it in Korean, but that W is silent. So in case you're wondering how my name is pronounced, that's how it's pronounced. There are a few ground rules, just 2 ground rules here at 6 Foot Wine Club. One is that if you have any questions, if you could just put that in the chat box or hold on to your questions until you're prompted for the Q&A, just so that we can keep things moving. The way it's designed, the first hour, kind of 8:30 to 9:30. Today, we'll probably go a little bit longer than 9:30, just because it's the first week of the month and I have to kind of explain. We go through the grid and I explain what that is. And so we take a little more time to kind of go through the protocols, so it takes a little bit longer. But moving forward, we try to keep it really to the I try to keep it really to the 8:30 to 9:30 for the regular programming. This is where we get geeky and break down the wine, talk about the producer, the region, answer any questions about the wine or technical aspect of the wine or whatever you may have. And then the 9:30 and on is kind of the after hours where we just kind of drink the wine and we hang out, and just turns into kind of a virtual wine club until you log off and go to bed. So that's kind of the structure of the wine club. So the first rule is that if you have any questions, please just put that in the chat box or just hold on to it until you're prompted to ask, just that we can keep things moving. Rule number 2 is we're all, adults with various different backgrounds and belief system, and we're all drinking wine and hanging out, especially the after hours. Sometimes there may be some things that's said that may offend you, or you may say something that may offend somebody else. When those things are brought to my attention, we're going to address that as a group. Know that is all coming from the place of love and respect, not from a place of scold or, what's the word? My brain's not working today. I'm not trying to censor you. I want you to show up authentically yourself, 100% yourself. But yeah, just in the interest of keeping this space feeling safe and fun for everyone. And when those things are brought to my attention, we're going to address that as a group. But that's it. Just those 2 ground rules. Everything else, pour yourself a fat glass of wine. It's hump day. Our tastings are always on hump days. So yeah, get a little hopped up, make some bad decisions. It will make your week go faster. Things will be better, much more fun that way. A few more announcements. Case Club goes live tomorrow. And tomorrow's Case Club, we will feature all the hits from the past. If you give me all the requests at this point, I've put in the inquiry for the inventory check to make sure it's there. The actual availability, the vintage, or the price is not guaranteed, but I will offer whatever that is available. So if you have not made a request, I cannot guarantee you that those will be available. Continue to send it to me, but I cannot guarantee you that I may be able to get that in time to feature it there. But yeah, so know that there will be a whole variety of wines on Case Club tomorrow. Those are all the wines that we featured in 2023 that you requested to see again on Case Club. So all that will go live tomorrow. And for those of you who are not familiar with what Case Club is, it's a perk of joining 6 Foot Wine Club. So at the beginning of each month, you have an opportunity to purchase any of the wines from the previous month at or near wholesale price. And then there will be wines that were not in the box, but did not make it into the box for one reason or another. I will feature those as well. But yeah, you as a newcomer, rookie, I know you haven't tasted the wines from last month, but you're more than welcome to participate if you like. And particularly for the Case Club that's coming out tomorrow, it'd be a good opportunity for you to get a chance of kind of a list of wines, repertoire of wines that we've kind of featured last year in 2023 and what the wine club members have found interesting and wanted to at least refeature on Case Club. So hits from the past will be going live tomorrow. So keep your eye out for my email on that. Besides that, I don't really have any other announcement besides 6 Foot Wine Club is committed to donating 1% of its gross revenue to an organization whose mission statement aligns with its values. And this month, I have chosen to donate to GiveWell. If you want to learn more about what the organization does, and if you want to donate alongside 6 Foot Wine Club, the donation link as well as a website for the organization is in the chat box. So go check it out. And if you don't want to donate, that's fine too, but just want to give you an opportunity. Any questions about anything I just went over before we get into the wine? Oh yeah, and then I said this at the beginning, in case you didn't hear me, you joined it a little bit later. I know in the email I said to open this as soon as the tasting was starting. If you did, and especially if you are noticing some kind of a stinky fart in your wine or some hard-boiled eggs, that's reduction. That happens when the wine is made in a very reductive setting, meaning during the winemaking process, there was not a whole lot of exposure to oxygen. It was made in a complete kind of a lack of oxygen environment. So reductive being opposite of oxidative. The wines tend to get these kind of smells. When it's really extreme, you can get like onion skin. You can even get like a matchstick, like head of a matchstick. But oftentimes you get these kind of farty, stinky, hard-boiled egg, sulfury kind of a thing. When you get that smell, that's because of reduction. And the good thing about reduction, unlike oxidation, is that you can fix it just by letting it sit there and open up, have exposure to oxygen. So if you're just opening this wine, I recommend that you decant it or at least pour it back and forth between glasses a few times. The reduction, I literally opened this like 5 minutes ago and 10 minutes ago, and then I decanted it and it's already starting to kind of blow up. So I highly recommend that you do that.
Can you take one question about the Case Club?
What's up?
Yeah, I can't match the names to the photos I took of the bottles. If I send you pictures of the bottles, could you identify them?
Sure. Yeah. Send it to me and then I'll figure it out.
All right. Terrific.
Yep. All right. Sorry, I spilled some wine over here. Disaster. Okay. All right. Hearing no other questions, let's get into the wine. This is what we're tasting today. We're kicking off the Austria month. This is actually a second Austrian box that I featured. The first Austrian box was within the first 3 months of starting the wine club in 2020. So almost 3 years later, we're coming back to Austria, but with a little bit different focus this time. But anyways, this is what we're tasting. This is non-vintage. In case you are wondering why there's no year in anywhere on the label, it's because this is non-vintage, meaning there's multiple vintages that are blended in this bottle, which again, it's not a mistake. It's intentionally done. So it's non-vintage Christoph Hoch or Hoch. I think it's Hoch. Christoph, Hoch, Hollenburger, Gruner, Veltliner is what we're tasting today. This little white label. All right. See, show you the Austria map. There you go. All right, here's a map of Austria. Right, in case you're wondering where Austria is, here's Germany, right? Or you can look at it here in this map. Right, here's us. So Everett, Washington. For this is actually quite important here. Look at how north it is, right? Everett, Washington, Quebec, Dijon, which is in the north end of Burgundy. And then only thing that's a more north than this is Champagne, essentially. This is the northern end of like a Chablis end of France, and it's the same parallel as that. So we're talking about quite north in terms of a winemaking location. It's a neighboring country to Germany, Switzerland, Italy, right? Slovenia. We've made, we've had wines from Friuli, which is this area right here between Italy and Slovenia, right? And so it's just north of that. We talked a lot about Austrian influence in the Slovenian region. And when we went to Slovenia, we spent time in Slovenia. So this is a northern country, northern neighbor of Slovenia. So as you can see, out of Austria, pretty much all wine production happens on the eastern border end of the country against Czech, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, right? All in the eastern border. Out of this, really, this area on the top north, the most northern part of it, and I'm going to sound like an asshole pronouncing all the Austrian regions this month because it's all German and they're very hard to pronounce. But Niederösterreich is the biggest, and then not only in terms of a landmass, but also in terms of a wine production, the quantity, as well as actually the quality. The most well-known, most reputable wineries and wines are all produced in Niederösterreich. Within Niederösterreich, particularly here, these three regions, Kamptal, Kremstal, and Wachau. These are the current, like the kind of the creme of the creme of Austrian wines. And when we're talking about Austrian wines, we're talking about really mostly white wines. And we're talking about all the Germanic varieties that you can think of as well, right? Riesling, Sylvaner, Pinot Blanc, all those things. But also the most well-known and most significant, Gruner Veltliner, which is what we're tasting today. There's also some international varieties here. Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc also is grown here quite a bit. And then there's also Muscat Autumnal, which is a very, very floral, aromatic variety that's grown here as well. But when we're talking about Kamptal, Kremstal, Wachau, we're really talking about Gruner and Riesling. Gruner being the most significant, but Riesling is up there as well. Arguably the world's greatest, some of the world's greatest Riesling and Gruner's white wines in the world, most aged, most nuanced, and most concentrated and complex and thought-provoking. Basically, some of the most sought-after white wines in the world arguably come from right here, Kamptal, Kremstal, and Wachau. And today we are in Kremstal. So out of these three regions, we're right in the middle right here in Kremstal. And within Kremstal, we're in a town. I don't know if it's written on the label. But, well, anyways, the name, the Hollenburger. So in Germanic language, whenever you see ER, that means it's like of that place. So Hollenburger means it's from or it's of Hollenburg. So it comes from an area or little town called Hollenburg. That's where this winery is located, and this is where the vineyards are located. But this is a Danube River, as you can see. This Danube River plays quite a bit of a significant role in Austrian winemaking or in viticulture. This being that north, as we mentioned, 48th parallel, the climate here is quite continental, meaning it gets quite hot and quite dry in the summertime, but it gets bitterly cold in the wintertime. Very, very cold, a lot of snow. we're talking about a country that's mostly covered by the mountains. I mean, the more than 60% of the country is the Alps that come down. So very mountainous region, very, very cold. But this Danube River is what moderates some of that kind of a marginal climate. That's what makes viticulture possible. So some of the best known vineyard sites like Kamdal, Kremsa, and Pakau all run through right here in this Danube River and its tributaries, as well as Vienne, which is the area right around Vienna, which is a Danube River runs right through it. This also plays quite a bit of role, kind of moderating that bitterly cold in the winter, but also in the summer, cooling down that really hot sun, and then allowing the wines to develop, retain its natural acidity. But there's some other regions. Last time we did Austria, we focused a lot on here, Neusiedlersee, as well as a Carnuntum, so this area. But this time we're going to focus a lot more on here, Niederösterreich in the north, as well as we are going to go to Middle Burgenland, so Burgenland at some point. So Burgenland is the second most significant in terms of the land mass as well as the amount of quantity of wine that's produced in Austria. So one wine, we're going to go to Middle Burgenland, but this month we're really spending our time in Niederösterreich, particularly around these three premier regions, Kamtal, Kremsal, and Pakau is basically where we're going to be. Austria, just out of curiosity, how many of you have had Gruner Veltliner before? Or how many of you, is this your first time having Gruner Veltliner?
This is my second time.
Okay. So not a whole lot of exposure. Okay, cool, perfect. So Austria viticulture here, as you said, just like most of the Western Europe, since the Roman times, Charlemagne and the Cistercian monks really influenced the development of vines here in Austria. And by the 13th century, Vienna had already become kind of like a major center for wine trade along the Danube River. So had built a quite a reputation for its wines, even dating all the way back to Roman times. The Romans knew that this was a good site for growing grapes and making good wine. Austrian wines are produced and exported in huge quantities through the Renaissance period. Of course, at that time, its neighbor countries, Hungary's Tokai, which is that really royally sweet, lusciously sweet dessert wine, as well as a Riesling from German region of Rheingau, where all the craze at the time, but the wines of Austria, both the Riesling and the Gruner Veltliner at the time, was also a well-known commodity. Phylloxera wiped out Austria, just like most of the Western Europe. Yet the country rebounded back to become the third largest producer in the world, the wine producer after World War II. And a lot of that just goes back to, I understand this is a bit of a generalizing comment, but the kind of industrialness of the Germanic people, which Austria is also part of, with a Germanic race. But Austria's commercial success in the 20th century really kind of comes from that industrial, technical innovation and development. Particularly, they put a lot of focus and energy into developing hybrids that were disease resistant and producing higher yields and all of that, which one of the bottles that we have this month is actually a blend between Riesling and one of these hybrids that were developed there. So we'll talk more about that later on this month. But yeah, so there was a lot of technical innovation that was going on in Austria. And to this day, Austria and Germany, there's a big viticultural centers and then kind of research centers there that still do a lot of work on genetic crossings and hybridization. I don't know if that's a word, but developing hybrids of different grape varieties there as well. Met with this kind of an international popularity and demand. This shift, the focus of the country kind of shifted to high volume, mass marketing, especially industrialization becoming popular. And then it took its toll on its quality, and the body of the wines became really light and without much quality or nuance or personality. It just became a commodity wine. And then this all led to what I call, quote unquote, it's not what I call it, but what the scandal that was called the antifreeze scandal that broke out in 1985, where some guilty parties, and just like any other scandals, not everybody was doing it, but a few foul players, tarnished the reputation of everyone else. But in 1985, a few Austrian producers try to claim the chemical diethylene glycol, which is a colorless, odorless, but also poisonous chemical that's found in antifreeze. And they added to their light wine to beef up the texture and kind of mouthfeel, because it was such a commodity light-bodied wine. It's a legitimate winery expense on their tax return, and they got caught doing it. So since then, customers canceled orders worldwide. Bottles then were subsequently tested, and then they were tested positive for the chemical in nearly every export market. So the media outlets decried the whole thing as, Austrians are diluting their wines with the antifreeze and all of that. So that hence the name, the antifreeze scandal of 1985. And that essentially that kind of association with the antifreeze committed by a few, not all, image of Austrian wines were just tarnished and damaged for years. And for the longest time, it didn't bounce back. But the funny thing is that what essentially destroyed the antifreeze scandal, that is destroyed Austrian wine reputation and image, is essentially what led to Austria becoming one of the most premier white wine, even red too, but particularly white wine producing nations in the world. The Austria responded by drafting some of the strictest wine quality laws in all of Europe. Even to this day, Austria has some of the most stringent and strict wine laws, and quickly kind of refocus on quality rather than just producing mass quantity. So in a very short amount of time, they were able to kind of earn new respect from the world for their kind of a classic premium style, as a classic premium winemaking nations of the world. And like I said, arguably producing some of the greatest white wines in the world as we speak right now. The Hollenburg, I want to talk a little bit. So I talked about Niederösterreich, Austria, Krimstal, the Hollenburg, the area that this is in. What makes this area really interesting, and the guy, Christoph Hoch, who makes this wine, 75% of his production is actually sparkling wine. He only makes a little bit, or only quarter of his production is still wine. But the reason being is because the soil. The soil is really interesting. There's a really, really high concentration of chalk and kind of like a river stones, but mostly that chalk. The chalk is there's so much chalk in the soil here that it almost matches Côte de Blanc in Champagne. Côte de Blanc, by the way, in French means white hills, just because there's so much chalk in the soil that from far that these hills in Champagne, this region, sub-region within Champagne, looks white. That's where the name Côte de Blanc comes from. But this area, apparently, Hollenburg, has just as much chalk as Côte de Blanc. And that kind of a mineral expression carries into the wines. A lot of his wines, Christoph's wines, has that kind of a similar chalky minerality that you find in Champagne. And that chalk is what inspired him to make sparkling wine. But today we're featuring his still wine because I think this is quite striking and different and fun and exciting. So let's talk about Christoph Hoch for a second. Let me show you pictures of. So this is him, young guy. By the way, Austria, just before you get into it, so after gaining that reputation as a classic traditional way in that really strict wine law, and then we're going to get into the wine law in subsequent weeks this month, but it's been really kind of a traditional and rigid in terms of styles of wine. While they're making classic, world-class wines, there were not a whole lot of innovations and creative forces and different things that were coming out of there until recently. I'm talking about within the last 10 years, last decade or 15 years or so. There are all these young folks, young generation winemakers that are coming out and they're trying to, go against the current, trying to do things on their own, trying to do things a little differently. And Christoph Hoch is definitely one of them. So here's him sitting on his barrel. Here's him and his dad, Harold or Harald. This is the vineyard. And I say this all the time. Anytime you go visit a vineyard or winery, look at what's between the rows. It will tell you whether they spray the field or not. I mean, look at how much growth there is in between. If this area was sprayed, this would be completely bare because everything would just be killed off. So this is usually a good way to tell whether they spray herbicide or pesticides or anything like that. But anytime you see these kind of a growth, it looks kind of unkempt, but you know, it's also a good thing, good indicator for organic farming. This is his wife, Julianne. Then a couple more pictures that I want to show you. These are the barrels. You see the labels. These barrels are going to play a big role. Kind of what he does makes him different about his wine production method. But this is cellar, one of his cellars. But yeah, that's him. So Christoph Hoch, he's a 12th generation winemaker. His family's been making wine since 1640. So, you know, we're talking about a very, very traditional, long-time winemaking family. All in his town of Hollenburg on the south side of Danube. But his farm is also, in his particularly his parents' farm, it's not just the vines, and his farm is as well. Again, going back to the kind of biodynamic principles of farming, where biodiversity is important. It's not just the grapes. Vine is just one part, one ingredient to kind of this holistic approach to the land. So he grows a lot of other fruits, vegetables, as well as raises animals as well. But wine is definitely his passion. He started making wine in his family winery in 2009. Then in 2013, he split from his parents, from Harold, that you saw his dad, starting with 5 hectares of the family land that would have been his inheritance eventually, but I guess he got it a little bit earlier. He convinced his dad to give him 5 hectares. So he started with 5 hectares in 2013. Today, what is that, almost 10 years later, he has 12 hectares now, all in Hollenburg and all farmed biodynamically, certified Demeter. You see that Demeter certification in the back, which is certification for biodynamic farming. And even within the Austrian world, Christoph is known as kind of like this consummate tinkerer and experimenter. He's kind of like a mad scientist kind of a guy. So in the vineyard, he has throughout all of his vineyards, I mentioned he grows a lot of different things, has focus on biodiversity, but he has a mix of mustard, rye, phacelia, chamomile, different kind of plants. He consider all of his parcels. He kind of categorizes all his parcels into 4 different categories: dry, chalky, nutrient-rich, and water holding. Depending on the category, he will plant herbs and grains accordingly. And for example, he will plant mustard that supposedly brings sulfur to the soil, to the surface of the soil, which protects the plants and transfers it naturally to the wines. And he believes he can use as little as possible of sulfur at bottling because the mustard helps bring up the sulfur to the surface of the soil. Rye brings carbon to the soil. He knocks it down after it has grown. It creates natural humus. The carbon from the rye works with the phacelia and creates nitrogen. He's constantly tinkering, innovating, just figuring out, you know, what's best for the land. So that's in the vineyard, but even the cellar, and this is where that barrels that I showed you comes in handy and why this thing is non-vintage. He wants to make wines traditionally maximizing the terroir, right? That sense of place, that French word that we always see in the wine world. So for him, he keeps his winemaking quite consistent, which means spontaneous fermentation, just using a layer of yeast, all in wood, old wooden barrels, the barrels that you saw. He uses both oak and acacia, but they're all very, very old. So we're not using it. He's not using it for flavor. He's using it more for texture, just as a vessel. Some on the skin, some racked. All of the wine is again aged in the old barrels. So we're talking about old fermented and aged in old barrels. And he treats each barrel as its kind of own experiment. So Christoph has 6 different cellars, all scattered around Hollenburg. for aging his wines. Each has its own kind of distinctions. One is a bit warmer, for example. So all the wines he puts into that cellar goes through full malolactic fermentation. One of the cellars he has is much cooler, and most wines do not go through malolactic fermentation, and they ferment much slower, ending up with a much more delicate aromas and being able to retain all those aromas. So he gets the grapes from the same kind of parcels, but he divides them into different barrels in different cellars and plays with different temperatures and levels of malolactic fermentation, speed of fermentation. Fermentation happens naturally and slowly in natural barrels. And then, because he's been doing it for so long, he now has wines in the cellar spanning several vintages. And he feels that limiting a wine to a single vintage does not show the best of the terroir expression. And most of his wines are non-vintage, which is something very rare. Nobody does it. With a dominant base layer, base year, and a previous vintage blended in. His still wines are always blend of 3 vintages, and his sparklings are blends of 2 vintages. For example, this one is a 40% from the current vintage, which is 2022, and then 40 from the last vintage, which is 2021, and 20% from 2 vintages ago from 2020. So we have 3 different vintages expressed here. What's interesting about all of this is that it kind of brings, he has a different perspectives on terroir, essentially. He's adding time as an ingredient in a way of expressing the land, right? Like for most people, when we talk about wine, we're talking about expression of that land in that one single vintage. But he sees it as like, wines from some areas are more structured or tannic, and they benefit from, spending time and blending with some other ones that are more fresh and fruity and fruit driven. The youngest wine is normally the fruitest and the most approachable, but also doesn't have a lot of the kind of the structure and the body that the older wines have. So by blending it all, he's able to, in his eyes, he's able to express the land, the Hollenburger, the soil, that chalky soil that we've been talking about, also through this lens of time. And it's kind of a complete unique way of highlighting this concept of terroir. I found all of his wines to be super singular in his style. Like there's a lot of weird wines that come out I tasted for this month, but his wines by far kind of stood out in its own category. There's nothing else that was quite like it. And I think, in my opinion, this kind of epitomizes or is some of the best representation of this kind of quote unquote new wines of Austria that I was telling you about. These kind of young generations, people coming in while keeping it somewhat while respecting the tradition, working with indigenous variety like Gruner that his family has worked with, using a lot of old traditional winemaking method like spontaneous fermentation in old barrels and all of that, but doing something completely new and different just outside the box, just trying to create their own kind of singular expression. And it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of balls, especially as a 12th generation winemaker, young winemaker of a traditional kind of winemaking family that has been making wine since 1600s to come out and be like, hey, Dad, thanks for the land, but I'm going to do things completely different. So yeah, I think it's super cool. I think these are the kind of things that we can expect to see more and more of coming out of Austria, and I think it's really exciting. Maybe this is, he created something that is not necessarily classic creme style. And you can find, if you want to try really classic creme style Bacchus that Austrian Gruner, you can find those in a lot of stores. I mean, Austrian wines are everywhere these days. And it even falls outside of the appellation. Like I mentioned, creme style, Comtal, Bacchus, those are the creme of the creme. Like having that appellation on that label means you can charge more. There's reputation that comes with it. But because he makes the wines the way he does, where it's non-vintage, blended across vintages, it falls outside of the appellation regulations. So even though his winery and all of his wines is made inside Comtal, he's not able to put the DAC, which is a Austrian equivalent of AOC, AOP, the appellation system. designation on the label, and he's intentionally choosing to do that because he wants to make wines without any limits, without any kind of constraints, and kind of do his own thing. So whether you like this wine or not, I think at least we can agree that it's something that is different, new, exciting, and risky. And I feel like I can feel that energy in this wine as well. So that's why I chose it. So this one is 40% from current vintage, 40% from last vintage, 20% from 2 vintages ago, like I mentioned, 100% biodynamic grown, hand harvested Gruner Veltliner. In case you're not familiar with the Gruner, it's an indigenous grape variety of Austria, by far the most important, significant grape variety. Riesling probably being the second, Blaufränkisch or Zweigelt, which is a red varieties. We do have a Blaufränkisch in this month's box. We'll taste later on as well, but both in white and red, Gruner Veltliner is by far the most significant grape variety of Austria. When we talk about Gruner, we're typically talking about white wine with just ripping acidity, especially when it's young and youthful. It has a touch of this kind of a green herbaceous, almost like radish like spiciness with like a sprinkle of a white pepper kind of a thing. That's very typical of young Gruner. And those, I mentioned this in the email, I really like ice cold Gruner in a hot summer day. That kind of Gruner is perfect, like to me. Like that's why I like a pool wine. There's a ton of young Gruner on the market. Increasingly, I see more and more of them in a 1 liter format rather than 7 to 15 milliliter format, which I think for that purpose, that kind of chugging poolside wine, I think is perfect. But what becomes really interesting with Gruner, oh, by the way, if you are a Sauvignon Blanc drinker, Gruner Veltliner is, especially the young Gruner, is probably a really good alternative option for you. So if you never had Gruner and you typically like Sauvignon Blanc, I highly recommend that you at least try Gruner Veltliner and try to kind of experiment around because it's a good alternative. And because of that herbaceousness, it's also oftentimes a good pairing option for notoriously difficult vegetable to pair, which is asparagus. So yeah, try pairing asparagus and Gruner or radishes and Gruner. It works, and it's a hard thing to pair. But where Gruner gets really interesting is this area that we're in, Kremstal, Kamtal, Wachau, this near Austria, this region, particularly on that western 3, creme de creme. As we get into a little bit more expensive, little higher end Gruner, they categorize the wines based upon their sugar level or ripeness level. But all the wines are fermented fully dry. Even the Riesling in Austria is fully dry. Everybody talks about Riesling being sweet. That's usually German. German Rieslings tend to have a little bit of sugar on there. Austrian Rieslings are bone dry. So if you want to try Riesling that is bone dry, you don't like sugar, recommend you try Austrian Riesling. But the same kind of classification level that Germans have. If you guys remember the Prädikatswein German level classification was Kabinett, lowest level of sugar, Sptlese, second, Auslese gets sweeter, and then Beer and Auslese, Cheung beer and Auslese, so it gets sweeter and sweeter. We're talking about sugar level, the ripeness level. The Austrians have the similar thing, and I'm going to put that in the chat box. So there's a Steinfeder, there's a Federspiel, and Smaragd. Oh, that's a typo, the last one. So that's the sugar level, kind of an equivalent of a German level. So Steinfeder is like a Kabinett level, very light, really aromatic, lighter body, usually comes in around like 11.5%. Federspiel is a little bit higher. So we're talking probably clocking at 12.5, 13%, and Smaragd is like 13.5%. So the alcohol gets bigger, body gets fuller, but these Gruners are some of the most age-worthy, some of the sought-after, most complex ones, and then it's worth checking out. It does get a little expensive, or not super expensive, but it does get more expensive than typical entry-level Gruner. But if you like Gruner, if you are interested in Gruner, curious about Gruner, I highly recommend that you sought out some of these Gruner wines from these three regions, and then taste through different sugar classifications just to see what it does. When it's basically this sugar. When I say sugar level, I'm not talking about it doesn't get sweeter because all that sugar gets fermented out fully dry. So it's still bone dry, but because all the sugar has converted to alcohol, alcohol level goes up. Acid level usually comes down a little bit, but it's still pretty high because Gruner in general is just a fucking face ripping acid wine. But it just gets fuller and more just robust and voluptuous and just bigger. So it's worth checking out. And I'll definitely feature some on the case club, next case club of what's available, what I think is a good examples of that. Anyways, so this is all Gruner, fermented aged in old oak barrels, like I mentioned, fermented through different cellars, like he does with all of his wines, and then a lot of blending across different barrels and different vintages. And then we ended up with this non-vintage, super weird, one of its kind of singular bottle. That is what we have here today. Any questions before we get into tasting? Perfect. Oh yeah. Yeah, my reduction fully blew off now. Also, I recommend you drink this over next couple days. I think this wine's going to open up and then change quite a bit. The reduction is going to blow off even more. I feel like this, the fruit's going to come out even more. But yeah, the last bottle I did have, I drank it over like a week, and it almost held up. It held up even after a week. So, all right. Oh, by the way, this wine is also 0.0, meaning there's no added sulfur on here. It's quite clean for wine that doesn't have any sulfur on it. All right, let's taste the wine. So here at 6 Foot Wine Club, we taste the wine through the grid. This is the grid. I have love and hate relationship with the grid. While I do think it is an incredibly clever and good way to kind of uniformize our language around a highly subjective experience that is wine tasting. I do think it is quite limiting, both in terms of describing the types of wines that we talk about, which are just kind of natural wines. These are more for kind of conventional wines, as well as some of these descriptors in the second page. These are the vocabularies we're supposed to use to describe the aromas and the flavors we're getting out of the wine. I do think they're very Eurocentric, and it is quite limiting. So even though this is what we're using, if the wine reminds you of certain aromas or flavors that you grew up with that may not be on here, you're not wrong. It's just that this is not on there. You know, as somebody once said, you know, it's not that this grid is wrong. It's correct, but it's correct for whom, right? This is very correct if you grew up in Western Europe. This is WSAT, Wine Spirit Education Trust, level 3 grid. Court of Master Sommeliers also has their own grid, very similar. You can look this up on Google, get this downloaded for free, readily available, but they're both British bodies. So we're talking about obviously the vocabularies and descriptors that describe, that relate to the British folks. So if you are not from there, you may, like, for example, like my mom, when we get into a lot of like the rancid, kind of oxidated, rancio or oxidated wines like sherry, my mom, for her, it reminds me of like this really lightly fermented soy sauce. And it makes total sense, right? But obviously, if I say soy sauce, I wouldn't get a point using this because it's not what British people are used to. So just an example. But anyways, use this as a general, just kind of loose guideline. Don't live or die by this thing. But we're going to use it to kind of talk about the wine. Here, it's divided into 4 different sections. So appearance, nose, palate, and conclusion. Appearance is when the wine, what the wine looks like. Nose is what the wine smells like, obviously. Palate is what the wine tastes like. We taste both for the flavor as well as a structure. So structure is like things like alcohol, tannin, acid, sugar level, moves, body, and the flavor is actual, like, what are we tasting? Calling out the fruits that we saw. Conclusion is when we finally take all this information that we've gathered, put it all together and call out the quality level of the wine, as well as like a readiness for drinking and ageability. So that's how we go through it. And we're going to go through it right now. I'll go through it. This is the first week of the month. So I will go through it to kind of show you how this is done. But starting next week, everyone will go around, we'll pick somebody to do one section of it. And it may be you. So be ready. But it's all good. It all gets better with practice, just like everything else in life. All right, let's start with an appearance. Pour yourself like half glass of wine. I'm talking like 2 to 3 ounces of wine, half glass. And then you're going to tilt it at like a 45-degree angle, like this. And then you're going to look through the deepest core from top to bottom, right? The natural sunlight is the best light, but obviously we don't have that. It's being 8:30 and the East Coast. So do your best. Having some sort of white paper you can put in the back is great, but if you don't, you can use your hand. But yeah, so kind of look through the wine. First, call it clarity. Is this wine clear or hazy? I'm going to say this wine is clear. It's not fully opaque, but I will note that this wine is not fully translucent, like star bright, clear. You can tell this wine has not been filtered or fined. If you decanted your wine, I don't know if you can really see it through the screen, like that is not, that is not very super translucent. By the way, I couldn't confirm this fact. By the way, getting a tech sheet for this thing was nearly impossible. And even the tech sheet that I didn't get a whole lot of information, actual technical information. But I'm willing to bet there's some skin contact on this thing. Just even looking at the color, but all the aromas and even the texture of this wine, I'm willing to bet there's a little bit of skin contact on this thing. But and that may be why this is like so, even for being a 0.0 so stable, because you get that kind of an antioxidative tannin, which is an antioxidant. But that's just a speculation. But yeah, intensity. So looking down on it, you just kind of make a call. There's some color here, right? So I'm going to call this about medium, maybe gold. But there's also this kind of orangey, kind of like a hue to it as well. There's a tinge of orange. So I'm still going to call this medium gold, but I'm going to note that there's a little bit like this orangish kind of a tinge. It's not just purely gold. Any other observation here? This is where you see any deposits, pétillant, bubbles. It's like if you shake it, do you see any bubbles coming up? I do not. Legs or tears. So when you swirl the wine, you let it sit. You see these kind of droplets forming, coming down the side of the wine glass. Those are called legs or tears. Those are what it basically tells you is the viscosity of the wine. So the alcohol or sugar level of the wine usually tells you it thickens or thins out the wine. Higher the sugar, obviously thicker the wine goes. Higher the alcohol, thicker, more viscous the wine is. But when we get to the later on, and tasting the wine, we actually verify the alcohol and we verify the sugar. So to me, this is redundant. It's an unnecessary step to really speculate it just based on the site. But it is something that they want us to note on the exam, but I think it's stupid. What I think is even more stupid is that when there's this somewhere people have gotten this notion that the legs or somehow slower moving legs mean like higher quality wine. Like I said, legs, all it tells you is the viscosity. It has nothing to do with the quality of the wine. So don't be that person when you go to a restaurant that says, this is amazing leg. Look at this beautiful legs. What a great glass of wine this must be. Like, you sound like an idiot. So don't do that. All right, nose. Give it a little swirl. And then I get my nose all the way in, and you can take one kind of like long, slow, deep breath, or you can take a couple 2 or 3 like short breaths. It's up to you. I tend to be the long whiff kind of guy, so do that. This wine is clean-ish. I wouldn't say this is fully clean. There's definitely, you can tell that this is not a squeaky clean guy. It's definitely sound. There's nothing wrong with it. This wine is sound, but I don't know if I would necessarily call this clean. There's a little bit of it's not even dirty, but you can tell this was made in a kind of a rustic setting, maybe old wooden setting, not in a stainless steel, every lab analysis along the way. It's not that kind of wine. It's like a farmer's rustic kind of a barn, made in a barn kind of a quality to it. So I'm gonna call this wine is sound, but it might be super clean, not squeaky clean. Intensity, however, it does have the intensity. It's quite aromatic. So if you start moving those in, like I get it here. So I'm gonna call this. So when your nose touches the glass, that's medium. Your nose in the glass, you're struggling to get this medium minus. Light is when you really can't get anything. Medium plus is when it's a few inches off the glass, and it pronounces even further. So I'm gonna call this medium plus because I get it around here. That's when I start to smell the wine, which is what is that, like 2 to 3 inches. So I'm gonna call that medium plus. Intense aromas of. I'll explain what primary, secondary, tertiary is, but youthful, meaning the aromas are mostly primary. Developing is they're starting to get secondary and tertiary things coming in. Fully developed, and now you're getting a full kind of a palette of primary, secondary, tertiary all coming through. Higher passes is when the aromas have kind of gone off the tertiary. You're not getting much of the primary and the fresh kind of a thing. So what is primary, secondary, tertiary? Let's go to the second page. So primary is aromas and flavors of the fruit itself, and then what results from the alcohol fermentation. All these things that we mentioned, all these fruits and flowers and different things, it's not because somebody puts it into the wine. It's because during the fermentation, all these different chemicals are produced. And then they're the kind of like same chemical that are responsible for making apples smell like apples, bananas smell like bananas, chamomile smell like chamomile. All these kind of aromatic compounds that are produced during the fermentation is what gives us the sense this wine gives a sense of this and sense of that. It's not necessarily because somebody put strawberry in the wine that we still smell strawberry, by the way. So all that is a primary, but again, as you can see, it's mostly fruits and flowers and basically fresh things. Secondary is post-fermentation winemaking. So after wine has fermented dry or finished fermenting, what they do with the wine. So you can put it in the new oak barrels, you can put it in old barrels like Christoph did in this wine. You can keep it in stainless steel, you can keep it in cement. You can do all kinds of different, you can keep it on the lees, which are dead yeast cells in contact with the lees, or you can get it off rack it off the lees. All these different things you can do is what happens in the secondary fermentation here. Tertiary is what happens when the wine has been aged, when it spends time. And mostly in the bottle, but it can be in barrels and different vessels and then bottled later before sale. But at that point, all these fresh kind of primary aromas start turning into dried, raisined, right? Dry apricot, dry apple, dry banana, things like that, figs. In some red wines, you get these kind of non-fruit things, leather, phosphor, earth, mushroom, game, meat, things like that. In terms of oxidation, because longer the wine sits or times, chances are it comes into some contact with the oxygen. That's when you start getting these kind of nutty things: almond, marzipan, hazelnut, walnut. If you ever get really old tawny port, or if you try some Madeira, you definitely know what this tastes like. So here we are. So let's smell it. We call this wine is sound, maybe a little unclean, not super squeaky clean, but pretty much clean, but touch of dirt, touch of rustic dirtiness in there. In medium plus intense aromas of, what do we get? All right, let's go through it. There's a little bit of, see, again, chamomile to me, it's usually two things. Chamomile and or hay is usually what tells me there's a little bit of skin contact. I don't know why, but for me, every time I come across orange wine or any kind of skin contact wine, I usually pick up one or both of those things. And there's definitely some chamomile. even like dry, like touch of dry hair, or like a chamomile that's been like starting to dry out. There's some of that here. So I'm almost certain that there's some level of skin contact. Again, could not verify the technical information, but I'm willing to bet there's some skin contact on the thing. But I get a little bit of chamomile, like a dried out chamomile kind of a thing. I definitely get some like appley, like a bruised apple, yellow apple kind of a thing going on here. Can convince me maybe there's some quince. But yeah, definitely get some like a apple, even pear maybe, like but not like fresh, crunchy pear. We're talking about like bruise, that kind of stuff. Citrus, definitely get lemon, salted lemon, as well as some but like also like a Meyer lemon, that orangey kind of like really ripe Meyer lemon, maybe orange peel a little bit here. Not much stone fruit for me here. No tropical fruit. No red fruit, black fruit. This is mostly for a red wine. Dry cooked. This is the nature of the fruit. This tells you kind of what the climate or weather was like, what happened during that year. To me, this like it's fresh. I mean, it's ripe. There's some fresh fruit here as well as some of that, like I mentioned, some of that bruise and not necessarily like stewed, but like the nature of the fruit is like a little bit like older, a little bit bruised, not like cooked, but it's not overripe, it's not underripe, it's just ripe but bruised. It's kind of what I'm getting here. Herbaceousness. There's a touch of that here for me. And again, it may be just a power of suggestion, knowing that this is Gruner, and I understand this is not a complete different style of Gruner, that like the young, really almost like spritzy kind of a vegetal Gruner. But I do get a little bit of here. I do get maybe like a pull of that little greenness if you're like walking by the side of the road, and maybe pull that little bit like that tomato leaf, maybe kind of a almost a leaf kind of a thing. This is where like I was getting tripped up a little earlier when I was smelling this. Like there's some sort of I feel like there's something herbal. Maybe I'm just confusing it with the herbaceous. I was thinking maybe some sort of like fennel illy kind of a thing, but I'm just gonna go with like the leafy, some green, touch of green. Spice, like I mentioned, there's some sort of white pepper, like radish spiciness or white peppery kind of spiciness usually found in Gruner. Honestly, I don't get a whole lot with this one. But yeah. And then, but this though, on the minerality front, I definitely get some like whetstone, like a river stone. Like if you ever got on a creek on like a hot day on the side, and as soon as you get to the first creek and the stones start to get wet, and you smell that, like there's some of that kind of wet stony kind of a thing here going on for sure. Secondary, not yeasty. There's nothing yeast here. MLF, by the way, I'm notoriously terrible at smelling MLF. Some people are really good at it. To me, MLF comes more, even like on the palate, to me, it's not a flavor thing. It's more of just kind of a textural thing. But some people are really good, but I'm notoriously terrible at detecting MLF. But personally, I don't get a lot of this kind of cream cheese. MLF is short for malolactic fermentation. It's where every wine, if you leave it alone at a room temperature or higher temperature, it automatically goes through this secondary fermentation called malolactic fermentation, where the malic acid in the wine converts into lactic acid. Malic acid is like a sharp, jagged acid. Think like green apple. Lactic acid is like round, softer acid. Think like lactose, just like cream, like sour cream, yogurt, right? Still tart, but like different kind of tart. Think of it that way. So butter, cheese, cream. This is what happens when it happens. Like I mentioned, Christoph puts some of his wine in the cellar. It's warmer, so it goes through a full malolactic fermentation. Some of his wines are in a cooler cellar, so it doesn't go through any malolactic. So there's probably a mixture. This is some level of malolactic that's going on here. But yeah, oak. This is we're talking about really new oak here. I don't get any of this really. We said this wine spent fermented and aged in old oak, but not in new oak. So none of this like warm baking spices. I don't get any of that. Tertiary, not really. Like maybe some of this, like you can convince me that there's some like dryness, like I mentioned, dry chamomile, some hay, and all of that. But to me, that's really from the wine itself, the kind of the skin contact that I'm speculating that's there. Not really doesn't come off as a old wine. Still smells and tastes like a very much a fresh wine, a young wine. So I wouldn't necessarily call this tertiary, but there's some sort of like a little bit of like a dried fruit, dried chamomile, dried flower kind of a thing going on. Hey, kind of thing going on here. All right, palate. Let's taste it. From the top. Taste it. Yeah, that's it. Move it all around. Listen the shit out of your mouth. Sweetness. This wine is bone dry. There's no sugar left on this thing whatsoever. Acidity. I mean, this is ripping. Like my eyes kind of watering from this thing. There's some acid on this thing. And Gruner is like that. Gruner is just ripping high acid. We're talking about like, this is borderline high. I almost want to call it high. Yeah, I'm gonna call this high. My mouth is watering. My eyes are almost watering. Yeah, this is a high acid. I mean, Gruner, just know that Gruner, anytime you get Gruner, you're gonna get high acid. Tannin, with white wine, usually you don't talk. I mean, I don't know. With some orange wines, skin contact wine, again, I don't know for sure. I'm just speculating here. With some skin contact wines, you can sometimes get tannin from the skins themselves, but I don't get much of it here, honestly. Maybe some of you who are much more sensitive to tannin than I am, maybe getting some of the little friction, but maybe a little bit. But I wouldn't even call this enough to call it low, but maybe a little bit. Maybe so. If you want to call it low, but if you call it no tannin, not even mention it. Usually white wine, we don't even mention tannin. This is really for the red wine, but I think that's perfectly reasonable. Um, yeah, there's a little bit here. I'm almost certain that there's skin contact. Alcohol. Get into the habit of guessing the alcohol percentage. Just kind of feel the warmth of your back of your throat after you spit or swallow, and then just kind of get a sense. This doesn't seem like a lot of alcohol, maybe 12%, 11 and a half, 11, 11 and a half. Yep. So Gruner from this region, especially that lower level ripeness category that I was telling you about, like Federspiel, you're not going to find that's going to be all, unless it's Smaragd, which is, you can get up to 13, 13 and a half. We're talking about 12 and a half and below. We're talking about not very high in alcohol. So yeah, so alcohol, just 11 and a half, that would put this in a kind of medium minus category. So medium is like 12 to 13 and a half, 13 and a half, 14 and a half is medium plus, high is 15 and above. Medium minus is like 10 and a half to 11 and a half, and then low is 10 and below. It's kind of the way to think about it. Body. Move the wine around. Don't pay attention to flavors or anything else. Just pay attention to the viscosity, the weight of the wine. See how viscous it is, how much weight it has as it moves around in the mouth. So I'm becoming even more convinced that there's skin contact here. With wines that are at clocking at 11.5%, you would expect this to be much lighter in body, right? And not that this has a huge body, but to me, this is like a higher in the medium minus, lower in the medium. If you call this medium, I think this is perfectly acceptable. I'll probably land on medium minus. But with the 11.5, I would expect it to be in the like the squarely medium minus, lower end of medium minus, even on light category. So the fact that something with 11.5% can have just kind of a body that's bordering on medium is probably because there's some skin contact on here. So I'm gonna call this a medium minus on body, but noting that this is very higher end of medium minus, bordering on medium. Mousse, we don't have to talk about that because it's not a sparkling wine. Flavor intensity. This I'm going to call this a medium plus. I mean, the flavors here are just jumping out. There's nothing shy about this one. Yes, it's light, it's low in alcohol, but the flavors are not muted at all. It's jumping out. It lets you know that you're there. It's there. So I'm going to call this medium plus. Flavor characteristics. This is where you confirm all the things you smell. See if there's anything else you get on the palate, as well as things you smell but you do not get on the palate. And quite frankly, it tastes like what it smelled like. You know, to me, that kind of chamomile, dried chamomile, not like fresh chamomile. But yeah, that like yellow apple, fresh yellow apple, as well as like bruised yellow apple, some of that like pear, bruised like Basque pear, ripe Basque pear, Meyer lemon, salted Meyer lemon, orange peel, all these things we mentioned, like it's all coming out here. The herbaceousness, quite frankly, I get less on the palate. Yeah, I get less on the palate than I initially had smelled on the nose. But again, this was never strong. This is just like again, it may be just power of suggestion because it's Gruner. I know that it's Gruner. Not getting this whole lot of peppery thing. You could convince me there's a little pepper here. Maybe there is a little pepper here, a little spiciness, but not getting a whole lot. Quite frankly, it lives in this citrus green fruit, dry chamomile, this land for me here. However, this right here, this minerality, this is where the textural thing comes from. And earlier, you remember I said it was a tannin, maybe, that I think, but more I think about it is I think it's actually the minerality. It's just like there's that kind of chalky, dusty kind of like a minerality that you often get with the champagne. There's similar thing going on here, and it's again, it's just made in the same kind of a similar soil type. A lot of chalk concentration here, and basically that's what he's known for, or this land is known for, and that's why his sparkling wines are popular, because here comes the Austrian wine that has a lot of chalk minerality, just like a champagne. But there's a little bit of that kind of like chalky, if you ever like dusted a blackboard eraser and you got that like chalk dust on your tongue, that kind of similarity like that. What that would feel like, that's got that kind of thing going on here. So definitely has minerality running through. None of the secondary, tertiary, again, none of this MLF. I do think it has in partial MLF because it's a little bit rounder. It's not like super jagged and sharp. The acid there's a lot of acid here. The profile of it is not like super sharp though. Not super round either, so I think it's like a partial MLF. No oak, no signs of new oak whatsoever. You can tell this is also not stainless steel, just because the mouthfeel of it is a little bit rounder. It's not just very, rectangular and angular. But new oak, no new oak, and definitely no tertiary here. So we're talking about still very much fresh, primary driven wine with some of the things like dry chamomile popping up, orange skins and things like that. Finish. How long do the flavors last? So take a sip, see how long flavors last. Huh. I'm gonna call this about medium, maybe higher end of medium, edging on medium plus, but I think I would land on medium. So not super low, just kind of hits, all the concentration comes through, but just kind of sits there and then it goes away. So I'm gonna call this about medium. So conclusion, this is where you put all the things together and call out the quality level and the ageability. So how good is this wine? Quality is a function of four things: balance, concentration, complexity, and length. Balance is just wine balance. Is there anything that is so overwhelming that is stopping you from experiencing other things? I don't think so. I think it's wine and bagel. You could argue that the acid is just so high that you cannot taste other things. Sure, acid is high. I don't think it's overwhelming though. I think we've definitely featured some wines in the past that were way better examples of maybe overwhelming acidity. So I'll say this is balance. Concentration, we called it medium plus on the nose, medium plus on the palate. So medium plus concentration. Complexity, how many different things did we smell and taste? Right, we had some floral, green fruit, citrus, right? A couple different citrus, green fruit, and floral. Some of these herbaceous kind of a thing, maybe a spice and minerality. So we're hitting a few things, not a lot, but like we're hitting quite a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 different kind of categories within just the primary, but no secondary and tertiary. So what would you call that? I don't know, medium. So we got balance, medium plus concentration, medium complexity, and then the length we called it medium. So when you take a average of all those things, we're saying balance, medium concentration, medium plus complexity, and then I'm sorry, medium plus concentration, medium complexity, and then medium length. So medium, medium, medium plus. The average of that comes then somewhere between medium and medium plus, right? But probably more towards medium than it is medium plus. So I'm going to call this good. When that average is medium plus, that's very good. When that average is, pronounced high, that's outstanding. That average medium is good. If it's a medium minus, it's acceptable. If it's low, it's poor. Faulty means there's something wrong with the wine. But given that we got 2 mediums and 1 medium plus, that's definitely falling somewhere in the middle. Had I gotten 2 medium pluses and 1 medium, I would call this very good. But since we got 2 mediums, I'm going to call this good. And again, wines could change, especially wines like this. I do think this wine is going to open up quite a bit tomorrow and the day after. So definitely give it some time and air and come back and try it again if you have some left. But as how it's drinking right now, I'll give this a good rating. Level of readiness for drinking and potential for aging. So how do you know if the wine is able to age? So wine needs to have 2 things, the structural component as well as a flavor component. Structural components, we're talking about acid and tannin. With the white wine, we're not really talking about tannin, so we're talking about acid. This has plenty of acid, right? We call this high acid. It's got the straight backbone. So the acid and the tannin basically act as a backbone. Acid meaning high acid, meaning it's low pH, means it's less likely the spoilage or bacteria are going to do some weird shit, and it just keeps it much more not just sterile, but harder for a bad bacteria to fuck up the wine as it ages, right? So acid. Tannin is an antioxidant, so it keeps the wine from being swallowed by oxygen, because there's always going to be some oxygen exposure as the wine ages, especially if it's a cork. There's microoxygenation that happens, exchange that happens through that. So the tannin stays there and protects the wine. So those things basically act as a backbone of the wine. So the flavors can kind of develop and do their own thing, and the wine doesn't fall apart. So this has a really good backbone, really good acid backbone. Now let's look at flavor, for example. Now flavor component is a function of 2 things, which is the intensity and complexity. Intensity, we had medium plus nose, medium plus palate, so pretty strong intensity. And complexity-wise, we called it medium, right? We call all the primary thing, no secondary, tertiary. But yeah, so complexity-wise, we call it medium. So looking at that, we got really good backbone, really good concentration. Complexity-wise, maybe slightly. But the point of aging is to 2 things. One, sometimes structurally the wine is just so tannic or so not harmonized yet. It's just that when it's young, you just haven't kind of really gotten into mellowed into your own spot. and it becomes really hard to drink. It's just physically hard to drink. So by aging it, some of that tannins could mellow out, some of that acid could also mellow out, so the wine becomes much more approachable. Another reason is to actually increase complexity of the wine by taking all the primary flavors and aromas. By aging it, it turns into these tertiary things. And if there's the reason why concentration is important is that you need to have concentration so it doesn't all just convert to tertiary, but some of it can stay as a primary and some of it can go to tertiary. So now you have both primary and tertiary flavors and aromas in the wine, increasing the complexity of the wine. So, we have these things, and then we have some of these primary fruits and aromas with a good concentration, and over time, could it go to tertiary, making this more wine complex? Yes, sure. Now, the last thing I would think about is a preference or for the style of the wine. Is that actually going to make the wine better? If this wine became more complex over time, is that actually going to make the wine better? More complex does not always mean the wine is better. Technically, in this sense, right, in the quality level, we call it, one of the things we talk about is quality, complexity. So maybe it will move it from good to very good. But sometimes the point of the wine is for it to be really fresh and young and meant to be consumed really youthful, like a lot of penates. And it should not be aged, because making it more complex is not necessarily going to make it better. It may make it more interesting, maybe, because it's just different shit going on. But would it make it more delicious, right? And that's a subjective call, honestly. So looking at this wine, I think it has a good backbone. It has good concentration, decent complexity. I do think there's some potential here. I would love to see maybe some of those some of the lemon, and then some of that kind of tree fruit primary things, maybe change some of it to older ones just to see how it goes. But in general, I really like the youthfulness and freshness of this wine right now. If this all changed to like a dry fruit, I don't necessarily know if I'll enjoy this wine much more. But again, that's a preference thing. Personally, if I have to call this wine, it's hard for me to call where it's going to be. But if I have to call this wine, I would say, I think this could age up to maybe 5 years. Come back in 2 if you wanted to age it. Come back in 2 and check up on it and see the development. If you see the direction of where this fruit is going, if you like that kind of dry fruit, getting less of the fresh fruit. And at that point, if you don't like it, then drink what you have. If not, just hold on to it longer. But in my opinion, I think you wouldn't have any problem. I wouldn't worry about this wine falling apart in the next 5 years just because that acid backbone is so searingly strong, is my guess. It would be my call on this one. So up to 3 and 5 years, come back and check in 2 years would be my recommendation for this wine. But honestly, another recommendation would be just drink it now, because I think it's drinking beautifully at this point as it is. So there you go. That is the grid. And then that's kind of, we go through it. And like I mentioned, sorry, this took a while. First of the month, it always takes longer, but starting from next month, it won't be as long. And then we'll get some people volunteer to take it. Now, any questions?
Since this was not at one specific year, there's older wine in this mixed together with it, right?
Yep.
So it's going to affect the aging process?
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only guess it by
changes, right?
Yeah, I can only guess it by where this wine is, where it currently stands. To me, this wine still comes off rather fresh and youthful. Like, this doesn't come off to me as like a age and old. So yeah, I mean, maybe this was like just one vintage, younger vintage, it would come up even fresher, and maybe that we wouldn't get. Maybe some of this dried kind of things that I'm getting is maybe a function of those kind of older vintages, not necessarily so much for skin contact. I don't know, and this is part of the reason why I want to get some technical information on this thing. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me to say it's the old wines that is affecting the ageability of this wine. I can only judge it by as an entire product, as a whole product as it is right now. And then for me, this still presenting as a very youthful young wine. I mean, it is 40% the latest vintage, mostly. So we're talking about majority of it is still base year vintage. Any other questions? Did everybody like this one? Did anybody not like this one? Any response?
I wish I wasn't sick and could taste it better because I feel like I would really like it.
Okay.
Woong, you know that I don't love this wine.
Not surprised to hear it.
It's not terrible, but it's not. I like a normal Gruner better.
The normies.
That's what I just said. Normal.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? By the way, what I'm doing right here is called double decanting. Basically, when you put the wine in the decanter and pour it back into the bottle. Any other questions, comments? You hated the wine?
I didn't get the strong smell when I opened the wine. Actually,
Okay.
was pretty reasonably taste. You know, pretty similar taste that it is right now.
Okay, good. Boom, look at that. Still got it. Did not spill a single drop. Still got it, baby. Still got it. All right, let's play everybody's favorite game. How much do you think this wine is on the retail shelf? How much would you be happy paying for this on the retail shelf? Think about it. It's Austria, from Kremstal. Though it's not within the appellation, but it does come from Kremstal. Yeah. 29, 30, 12. Tell me you hate this wine without telling me you hate this wine, Kelly.
Not my favorite.
Love it, love it. 38, 40. Okay, Shannon. 24, 29, Phil. Okay. Charles, 29. Okay. This wine on the retail shelf would be, goes to Phil, $24. So I think it's a pretty danging wine for $24. I think you get a lot in wine for $24. So yeah, there may be quite a bit of wines this month that may split the room. Yeah, there were quite a few that were quite out there, and that's why I like them. So we'll see how you guys all respond. Maybe we'll have a lot of Kelly's response this month. We'll see. Any questions or any other questions?
When I looked after you mentioned it, and he definitely does skin contact in some barrels. So like, you never know what vintage, what barrel, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely get like light tannin.
Yeah. There's something there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was like saying maybe it's that chocolate minerality, maybe it's tannin, but just something there.
I think there's tannin for sure. My gum dries out like a little bit. And when I opened it up, I didn't get anything. I don't know, maybe it's reductive, but it was almost like the chamomile was almost more like chrysanthemum. Like it was like a more pronounced, but like weird floral.
Okay. Yeah, mine smelled like straight up fart.
Sorry, I meant marigold. Sorry.
Marigold. Okay.
Yeah, completely. Chrysanthemum, not the right. marigold, but yeah, I like this one. I think it's cool.
I think it's also one of those things that makes a lot more sense with food as well. I don't know if you guys, anybody did schnitzel, with especially like with a sprinkle of like a squeeze of lemon wedge on that thing. I think it'd be perfect. Did anybody pair this with any food that worked or did not work? Okay.
What
Cool.
cheese did you say would go with it?
What's that?
What cheese was it that you said would go?
I just said like soft cheese.
Soft cheese. Okay.
Yeah, soft.
It's good with.
Yeah, you know, though, as the wine is warming up, I do think there's some partial mallow in here because the lemon character here, what I call Meyer lemon earlier, is kind of getting into this like a lemon curd kind of a thing, not like fresh lemon. Now that it's kind of come up on temperature a little bit. I still get like orange skin and things like that, but yeah. Anyways. All right, well, hearing the questions, I'm gonna stop the